Imagine a world where power is absolute and betrayal is a daily occurrence. Welcome to the story of America's most notorious mafia bosses. The shadows of the Prohibition era stretched across the bustling streets of 20th century America, concealing a dark underbelly of crime and corruption. It was a time when the speakeasies and backroom gambling dens of the nation's urban centers became the breeding ground for a new breed of criminal mastermind, the notorious mafia bosses who would come to dominate the organized crime landscape. This was the golden age of La Cosa Nostra, the Italian-American crime syndicate that would leave an indelible mark on the country's history. From the ruthless visionary Charles "Lucky" Luciano to the flamboyant, dapper Don John Gotti, a select few would rise to infamy, wielding vast power and influence that stretched from the smoke-filled backrooms of New York to the highest echelons of American politics and society. Their stories are the stuff of legend, tales of ambition, greed, and the corrupting influence of wealth and power. These men, driven by a relentless pursuit of riches and status, would reshape the very nature of organized crime, forging a criminal empire that would become deeply embedded in the fabric of the nation. Yet beneath the veneer of their opulent lifestyles and criminal exploits lay a complex web of loyalty, betrayal, and the ever-present threat of violence. For the mafia bosses, the stakes were high, and the consequences of failure were often deadly. Join us as we delve into the lives and legacies of the 5 most powerful and influential mafia bosses of the 20th century. Through their stories, we will uncover the intricate workings of the American Mafia, the forces that fueled its rise, and the factors that ultimately contributed to its downfall. Chapter 1. Lucky. Luciano, the architect of modern organized crime. Charles "Lucky" Luciano's rise to power marked a pivotal moment in the history of American organized crime. Born Salvatore Lucania in 1897 to Italian immigrants in Sicily, Luciano's early life foreshadowed the ruthless ambition that would come to define his criminal career. As a young man, he quickly ascended the ranks of the New York underworld, demonstrating a keen intellect and an unwavering willingness to use violence to achieve his goals. Luciano's first major move came in the early 1920s when he formed a close alliance with Meyer Lansky and Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Together, they established a powerful criminal syndicate that controlled much of the city's lucrative bootlegging operations during Prohibition. Luciano's organizational skills and strategic thinking allowed him to outmaneuver rival gangs and consolidate his hold over the burgeoning illicit trade. Luciano was a visionary, recalled Lansky years later. He saw that the old ways of doing business were outdated. He wanted to bring the mafia into the modern age, and he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty to make it happen. In 1931, Luciano orchestrated the assassinations of 2 of the most powerful mafia bosses at the time, Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. This bold move allowed Luciano to seize control of the Masseria crime family and eliminate his main rival, Maranzano, who had been vying for the title of Boss of Bosses. With his enemies eliminated, Luciano set about restructuring the mafia along more efficient corporate lines. The old-school bosses were stuck in their ways. Luciano later explained. They were too territorial, too quick to start a war over turf or insults. I knew we needed to modernize if we were going to survive and thrive. Luciano's crowning achievement was the creation of the Commission, a governing body that brought together the leaders of the 5 families of New York City, as well as representatives from other major crime syndicates across the country. This innovative system allowed for more coordinated decision-making, the resolution of disputes, and the equitable division of profits and territories. The Commission was Luciano's masterstroke, said organized crime historian James Jacobs. It transformed the mafia from a collection of warring factions into a cohesive, sophisticated criminal enterprise. Luciano was the architect of modern organized crime in America. Luciano's rise to power, however, was not without its setbacks. In 1936, he was convicted on charges of operating a prostitution ring and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. Many believed the conviction was the result of a concerted effort by law enforcement to take down the ambitious mafia boss. While incarcerated, Luciano continued to wield significant influence over the mafia's operations. His connections and strategic thinking proved invaluable during World War II, when he collaborated with the US government to provide intelligence and disrupt Axis operations in the Mediterranean. This unlikely alliance, known as Operation Underworld, helped secure Luciano's eventual release and deportation to Italy in 1946. Luciano was a pragmatist, said former FBI agent Joe Pistone. He recognized that sometimes you have to work with your enemies to achieve your goals. His willingness to cooperate with the government during the war was a testament to his cunning and foresight. Despite his deportation, Luciano's influence on the American Mafia remained profound. The commission he had established continued to shape the operations and power dynamics of organized crime in the United States. Luciano's vision of a more streamlined, efficient criminal enterprise had become a reality, with the 5 families of New York City serving as the backbone of the mafia's national and international reach. Luciano was a true visionary, reflected former New York City Police Commissioner William Bratton. He saw the potential for the mafia to evolve and adapt to the changing times. In many ways, he was the architect of the modern organized crime landscape in America. As the mafia's grip on American society continued to tighten in the decades following Luciano's deportation, his legacy as the driving force behind the transformation of organized crime would become increasingly evident. The shadow of the architect of modern organized crime would loom large over the rise and fall of the notorious mafia bosses who followed in his footsteps. Chapter 2. Frank Costello, the Prime Minister of the Underworld. Frank Costello's rise to power within the American Mafia mirrored the rapid growth of organized crime during the Prohibition-era. Born as Francesco Castiglia in southern Italy, Costello immigrated to the United States as a child and quickly established himself as a formidable figure in the criminal underworld. Prohibition's enactment in 1920 proved to be a significant turning point for Costello. The lucrative bootlegging business presented an opportunity for ambitious men like Costello to amass wealth and influence. Aligning himself with the Luciano crime family, Costello quickly rose through the ranks, leveraging his business acumen and political connections to expand his criminal empire. Costello's savvy operations and ability to navigate the murky waters of New York City politics earned him the moniker the Prime Minister of the Underworld. His close ties to the Tammany Hall political machine allowed him to exert control over law enforcement and the judicial system, ensuring the smooth operation of his illicit enterprises. One of Costello's most significant achievements was his ability to to forge alliances with influential figures in both the criminal and legitimate spheres. He cultivated relationships with politicians, judges, and police officials, ensuring a steady flow of information and protection for his activities. Costello's wealth and connections made him an indispensable asset to the Luciano crime family, solidifying his position as a key player in the mafia hierarchy. As Prohibition came to an end in 1933, Costello's influence only continued to grow. He seamlessly transitioned his criminal operations into the post-Prohibition era, diversifying his investments and expanding into legitimate businesses such as real estate and gambling. Costello's business acumen and ability to adapt to changing circumstances cemented his status as one of the most powerful and respected figures in the American Mafia. Costello's reign at the top of the Luciano crime family was not without its challenges, however. In the late 1940s, he found himself in the crosshairs of his longtime rival, Vito Genovese. Genovese, an ambitious and ruthless capo, had long coveted Costello's position and sought to eliminate him. In 1957, Genovese orchestrated an assassination attempt on Costello, which left the Prime Minister of the underworld seriously wounded but alive. The attack on Costello marked a turning point in the power dynamics within the American Mafia. Genovese's brazen move against Costello was seen as a direct challenge to the established order and the code of silence that had long governed the criminal organization. The failed assassination attempt only served to further solidify Costello's reputation as a savvy and resilient leader, able to navigate the treacherous waters of the mafia landscape. Despite the attempt on his life, Costello continued to wield significant influence within the Luciano crime family. He maintained his vast network of political and business connections, using his wealth and power to protect his interests and ensure the continued success of his criminal empire. Costello's ability to adapt and survive in the face of adversity was a testament to his cunning and resourcefulness. As the 1950s drew to a close, Costello's reign as the Prime Minister of the underworld began to wane. The increasing scrutiny of law enforcement, the rise of new criminal factions, and the growing power of younger mafia bosses like Carlo Gambino all contributed to Costello's gradual decline. In 1957, he was forced to relinquish control of the Luciano crime family to Genovese, a move that marked the beginning of the end of Costello's dominance in the American Mafia. Despite his eventual downfall, Frank Costello's legacy as one of the most influential and powerful figures in the history of organized crime in America remains undiminished. His ability to navigate the treacherous world of the mafia, his political connections, and his business acumen have all become the stuff of legend, cementing his place as a towering figure in the annals of American criminal history. Chapter 3: Vito Genovese, the boss of bosses. Vito Genovese's ruthless climb to the top of the American Mafia was marked by a trail of bodies and a relentless ambition that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Born in 1897 in Naples, Italy, Genovese immigrated to the United States as a teenager, quickly establishing himself as a formidable force in the criminal underworld of New York City. In the 1920s, Genovese began working for Lucky Luciano, a rising star in the mafia who recognized Genovese's cunning and brutality. Together, they orchestrated the assassinations of rival bosses Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano, paving the way for Luciano to consolidate power and create the modern American Mafia. Genovese's ruthlessness and loyalty to Luciano earned him a seat on the newly formed Commission, the governing body that oversaw the 5 families of New York. As Luciano's protégé, Genovese expanded his criminal empire, diversifying into drug trafficking, extortion, and racketeering. His wealth and influence grew exponentially, and he soon became one of the most powerful figures in the Mafia. Vito was a real killer, recalled Vincent Gigante, a capo in the Genovese crime family. He didn't mess around. If you crossed him, you were dead. Genovese's ambition, however, would ultimately be his downfall. In the late 1940s, he orchestrated the assassination of his former mentor, Frank Costello, in a bid to take control of the Luciano crime family. The attempt failed, and Costello survived, but the damage was done. Genovese's reputation as a cold-blooded killer had been cemented, and he was forced to flee to Italy to avoid prosecution. During his exile, Genovese continued to wield influence over the American Mafia, using his contacts and resources to maintain a foothold in the criminal underworld. In 1957, he engineered a bold move to reassert his dominance, the infamous Appalachian Meeting, held at a modest home in the small town of Appalachian, New York. The gathering was intended to be a secret summit of the Mafia's top leaders. Genovese's ambition had once again outpaced his caution, and the fallout from the event would ultimately lead to his downfall. In the aftermath of Appalachian, Genovese's grip on power began to slip. The revelation of the meeting's existence and the arrests of so many high-profile mafia figures sparked a renewed crackdown by law enforcement. Genovese's criminal activities came under intense scrutiny, and in 1959, he was convicted on narcotics charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. The conviction marked the end of Genovese's reign as the boss of bosses. While he continued to wield influence from behind bars, his power and influence had been irrevocably diminished. The Appalachian Meeting had been a catastrophic miscalculation, exposing the Mafia's inner workings and leading to the downfall of one of its most ambitious and ruthless leaders. Genovese's story serves as a cautionary tale of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the fragility of even the most powerful criminal empires. His rise and fall highlight the evolution of organized crime in America as law enforcement and public awareness increasingly challenge the Mafia's grip on society. The legacy of Vito Genovese and the Appalachian Meeting would cast a long shadow over the American Mafia, foreshadowing the eventual decline of its golden age. Chapter 4. Carlo Gambino, the Quiet Don. As the Mafia's old guard faced increasing scrutiny and downfall, Carlo Gambino emerged as a new breed of boss, one who preferred to operate in the shadows rather than court the spotlight. Unlike the flamboyant and headline-grabbing figures that preceded him, Gambino embodied a more calculated and strategic approach to criminal enterprise. Born in 1902 in Palermo, Sicily, Gambino immigrated to the United States in 1921, joining his cousin Paul Castellano in New York City. He quickly rose through the ranks of the Castellamarese clan, proving himself a ruthless and capable enforcer. When the Castellamarese War erupted in the early 1930s, Gambino aligned himself with Lucky Luciano, helping to orchestrate the demise of his former associates. Luciano's restructuring of the American Mafia paved the way for Gambino's ascension. In 1957, he took control of what would become known as the Gambino crime family, one of the 5 families that dominated organized crime in New York. Unlike the brash and ostentatious bosses before him, Gambino preferred to maintain a low profile, avoiding the kind of public attention that had proven disastrous for his predecessors. Gambino was a master of the long game, said organized crime historian Vincent Blanda. While others sought power and wealth through brazen displays, he quietly expanded his family's interests and solidified his hold on the mafia hierarchy. Indeed, Gambino's approach was marked by a keen business acumen and strategic thinking. He diversified the family's criminal enterprises, branching out from traditional rackets like extortion and loan sharking into more lucrative ventures. Under his leadership, the Gambino crime family established a strong foothold in the construction industry, skimming profits from major building projects across the city. Gambino also recognized the value of maintaining strong ties to legitimate power brokers. He cultivated relationships with politicians, union leaders, and law enforcement officials, ensuring a steady flow of information and protection. This web of influence allowed the Gambino family to thrive, while other mafia factions faced increasing pressure from the authorities. Gambino understood that the key to longevity in this business was not just raw power, but the ability to navigate the political and social landscape, said former FBI agent Thomas Marino. He built an empire on discretion and pragmatism, rather than the kind of bombastic displays that had brought down so many of his peers. This strategic approach extended to Gambino's personal life as well. He avoided the lavish displays of wealth and status that had become a hallmark of mafia bosses, preferring to maintain a modest public profile. Gambino's home in Howard Beach, Queens, was a far cry from the palatial estates of the Genovese or Luciano families, and he was known to drive a simple Buick rather than the flashy cars favored by his contemporaries. Gambino understood that discretion and restraint were the keys to longevity in this business, said organized crime expert Gina Russo. He cultivated an image of the quiet Don, a man of few words and even fewer public appearances. This allowed him to avoid the kind of scrutiny that had brought down so many of his peers. This low-profile approach paid dividends for Gambino, as he managed to avoid the kind of high-profile prosecutions that had ensnared other mafia bosses. While the Genovese, Luciano, and Costello families were rocked by a series of high-profile trials and convictions, Gambino remained largely untouched by law enforcement, cementing his status as one of the most powerful and influential figures in the American Mafia. Gambino's reign as boss of the Gambino crime family spanned 2 decades, from the late 1950s until his natural death in 1976. During this time, he oversaw the expansion of the family's interests into legitimate businesses, diversifying their portfolio and insulating themselves from the kind of scrutiny that had brought down other mafia factions. Gambino was a master of reinvention, said former NYPD detective Anthony Fiore. While others clung to the traditional rackets, he recognized the need to adapt and evolve. He built an empire that was as much about business acumen as it was about brute force and intimidation. Indeed, Gambino's strategic vision extended beyond the confines of the mafia as he sought to position the family as a major player in the legitimate economy. The Gambino crime family established a presence in industries ranging from construction and waste management to real estate and labor unions, using their influence and connections to secure lucrative contracts and skim profits. Gambino understood that the future of the mafia lay not just in traditional criminal enterprises, but in the ability to infiltrate and control legitimate businesses, said organized crime historian Vincent Blanda. He was a visionary in that sense, recognizing the need to diversify and adapt to a changing landscape. As the Mafia's golden age began to wane in the 1970s, Gambino's foresight and prudence allowed the Gambino crime family to weather the storm. While other families faced increasing pressure from law enforcement and a shifting public perception, the Gambinos maintained their grip on power, cementing their status as one of the most formidable criminal organizations in the country. Gambino's death in 1976 at the age of 74 marked the end of an era, as the Mafia began to confront the challenges of a new generation. His successor, Paul Castellano, sought to continue the family's tradition of discretion and pragmatism, but the changing times would ultimately prove too much for the old guard to handle. The story of Carlo Gambino stands as a testament to the adaptability and resilience of the American Mafia. While his contemporaries rose and fell, Gambino's strategic vision and preference for the shadows allowed him to maintain his power and influence for decades, cementing his legacy as one of the most successful and enduring mafia bosses in history. Chapter 5. John Gotti, the Dapper Don. John Gotti's rise to power within the Gambino crime family marked a new era in the history of the American Mafia. Unlike his low-profile predecessors, Gotti embraced a flamboyant public persona that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Known as the Dapper Don for his expensive suits and charismatic demeanor, Gotti's brazen style and disregard for secrecy signaled the beginning of the end for the old guard of organized crime. Born in 1940 in the Bronx, John Gotti came from humble beginnings, the son of a sanitation worker. From an early age, he gravitated towards the criminal underworld, dropping out of school and joining the Gambino family as a young man. Gotti's natural talents for violence and intimidation quickly earned him a reputation, and he rose through the ranks, becoming a capo, or captain, by the late 1970s. Gotti's opportunity to seize control of the Gambino family came in 1985 when he orchestrated the assassination of the family's boss, Paul Castellano, in a bold and public display of power. Gotti's decision to have Castellano gunned down outside a Manhattan steakhouse rather than the traditional behind-closed-doors method shocked both law enforcement and the mafia hierarchy. This act of defiance cemented Gotti's position as the new boss of the Gambino family. Unlike his predecessors, who had carefully maintained a low profile to avoid law enforcement scrutiny, Gotti embraced the spotlight. He cultivated a media-savvy image, granting interviews and making public appearances that only served to heighten his notoriety. Gotti's flamboyant style, designer suits, and flashy lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the more discreet approach of earlier mafia bosses. Gotti's brash behavior and disregard for secrecy were not lost on the authorities. The FBI had long been investigating the Gambino family, and Gotti's high-profile antics made him a prime target. Agents worked tirelessly to gather evidence against the new boss, hoping to finally bring down one of the most powerful figures in organized crime. The opportunity presented itself in 1990 when the FBI gained access to a secret recording device that had been planted in Gotti's favorite hangout, the Ravenite Social Club. The tapes captured Gotti and his associates discussing their criminal activities in explicit detail, providing the Bureau with the evidence it needed to build a case against the Dapper Don. In 1992, Gotti was finally brought to trial, facing charges of racketeering, extortion, and murder. The prosecution's case was bolstered by the damning recordings, as well as the testimony of former Gambino family underboss Salvatore "Sammy" the Bull Gravano, who had turned state's witness. Despite Gotti's best efforts to portray himself as a legitimate businessman, the jury saw through his carefully crafted image and convicted him on all counts. Gotti's downfall marked a significant shift in the American Mafia's power structure. The Dapper Don's flamboyant style and disregard for the traditional code of silence had made him vulnerable to law enforcement, a stark contrast to the more cautious and calculating approach of earlier mafia bosses. Gotti's conviction and life sentence in prison signaled the end of an era, as the old guard of organized crime gave way to a new generation of criminals who lacked the discipline and strategic thinking of their predecessors. In the aftermath of Gotti's downfall, the Gambino family struggled to maintain its grip on power, and the broader American Mafia found itself in a state of decline. The increased scrutiny and aggressive tactics of law enforcement, coupled with the erosion of public tolerance for organized crime, had taken a significant toll on the once powerful criminal empire. The legacy of John Gotti, however, endures. His larger-than-life persona and the media spectacle surrounding his trial have cemented his place in popular culture, with the Dapper Don becoming a symbol of the Mafia's golden age and the excesses that ultimately led to its demise. Gotti's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the futility of a life devoted to crime, even for the most notorious of mafia bosses. As we've seen, John Gotti's story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the futility of a life devoted to crime. His legacy, though controversial, continues to fascinate us to this day. If you found this video on America's most notorious mafia boss intriguing, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating historical content. Make sure to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who's as passionate about true crime history as you are, why not share this video with them? Your support helps us continue bringing you these gripping stories from the annals of organized crime. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.